The cabin had been locked for 50 years, but the moment Claire Morgan turned the old key, she heard a whisper from the past telling her she was finally home. The mountain air of Colorado carried a quiet mystery as Claire stood before the wooden cabin she had inherited from her grandmother's family. She expected a forgotten building filled with old furniture and memories. She never expected to find a place that seemed to be waiting for her arrival. The cabin rested deep among the tall pine trees, far away from crowded streets and familiar routines. For most people, receiving an old mountain property would have felt like a simple inheritance. But Claire had always known her family kept secrets. Her grandmother rarely spoke about the cabin. Whenever Claire asked about it as a child, her grandmother would smile softly and say, "Some places remember the people who belong to them." At the time, Claire thought those words were just an old family saying. Now, standing outside the cabin with a small box of belongings in her hands, those words felt different. After her grandmother passed away, Claire received a letter explaining that the cabin was now hers. There were no long instructions, no detailed explanation, only a simple message asking her to visit the mountain when she was ready. Claire had spent years building a normal life away from the quiet traditions of her family. She worked hard, lived independently, and never expected an old cabin to become part of her future. Yet something about this place felt strangely familiar. When she stepped inside, the wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, and the scent of old cedar filled the room. Dust covered the shelves, but everything seemed carefully preserved. Family photographs rested on a small table. Handwritten notes were stored inside drawers. An old fireplace stood at the center of the room, surrounded by carvings that Claire had never seen before. She moved closer, studying the unusual symbols carefully. They were not decorations. They looked like they carried meaning. A feeling she could not explain passed through her as she touched the carved wood. It was as if the cabin was not simply a building. It was a piece of a story that had been waiting for someone to continue it. As the evening arrived, Claire explored every corner of the property. Behind the cabin, she discovered a small path leading deeper into the mountain forest. The trail looked untouched, yet it felt strangely familiar, almost as if someone had walked there many times before. She followed it until she found an old stone marker covered by years of nature. There were more symbols carved into the stone, matching the ones inside the cabin. Claire wondered why her family had kept this place hidden for so long. She wondered what her grandmother had known but never explained. That night, as the moonlight entered through the cabin windows, Claire found an old journal hidden beneath a loose wooden board. The first page contained only one sentence written decades earlier. "When the rightful heir returns, the mountain will reveal what was forgotten." Claire stared at the words, feeling a strange connection to a history she had never known existed. She did not know that the cabin held a secret connected to a powerful figure from another world. She did not know that the mountain had been protecting a promise made long before she was born. All she knew was that her grandmother had left her more than an old cabin. She had left her a mystery waiting to be uncovered. The journal was older than Claire expected, but the words written inside felt as if they had been waiting for her all along. She sat beside the old fireplace, holding the faded pages carefully while the mountain wind moved softly around the cabin. Every line seemed to reveal another piece of a story her family had chosen to protect. The journal belonged to her grandmother's mother, a woman Claire had only heard about through family stories. Her name appeared on the first few pages, followed by notes about the cabin, the mountain, and a promise that had lasted for generations. Claire turned each page slowly, searching for answers. She learned that the cabin was never just a family home. It had always been connected to something much older. Her ancestors had protected this place because it represented a connection between two worlds that most people never knew existed. The writings mentioned a guardian who lived beyond the mountain forests, someone whose name was never written clearly. Instead, the journal referred to him only as the King of the Mountain. Claire smiled at the strange title, thinking it sounded like something from an old legend. She had always enjoyed stories from the past, but she never imagined her own family could be connected to one. As she continued reading, she found a drawing that looked almost identical to the symbols carved inside the cabin. Beneath it were words that made her pause. "Some promises are not forgotten. They wait for the right person to return." Claire closed the journal for a moment and looked around the room. The cabin suddenly felt different. The old wooden walls, the hidden markings, and the carefully preserved belongings no longer felt random. Everything seemed connected. The next morning, Claire decided to explore more of the mountain. She wanted to understand why her grandmother had left this place to her, and why the journal had been hidden. Following the old trail behind the cabin, she discovered signs that someone had maintained the area over the years. The path was clear, the surroundings were peaceful, and there were small details that suggested the mountain was not as empty as it appeared. At the edge of the forest, Claire noticed a large stone structure covered with the same ancient symbols from the cabin. Before she could examine it further, she heard a calm voice behind her. "You were not supposed to find this place so soon." Claire turned and saw a man standing several feet away. He looked like someone who belonged to the mountains, carrying a quiet confidence that immediately caught her attention. His name was Adrian Blackwood. He did not seem surprised to see her. In fact, he looked as though he had been expecting her arrival. Claire asked how he knew about the cabin and the symbols. Adrian looked toward the old stone marker before answering. "Because I have been watching over this mountain for a very long time." His words created more questions than answers. Claire wondered who he was and why her family history seemed connected to him. Adrian did not reveal everything, but he told her one important thing. "Your grandmother knew the truth about this place. She protected a promise that began many years ago." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Claire returned to the cabin with more questions than before. She still did not know who Adrian truly was, but she knew one thing. Her grandmother had not left her an abandoned cabin. She had left her a doorway into a hidden world that had been waiting for her to discover it. The questions surrounding the mountain only grew stronger after Claire Morgan met Adrian Blackwood. She returned to the old cabin that evening carrying the journal in her hands, but her thoughts were focused on the mysterious man who seemed to know more about her family than she did. The mountain that once felt quiet and forgotten now felt like a place filled with hidden memories. Claire placed the journal on the wooden table and carefully reviewed the pages again. She searched for any mention of Adrian, the guardian, or the promise her grandmother had protected. This time she noticed details she had missed before. Several pages described a connection between her family and the guardian of the mountain. The writings did not describe him as a stranger. They described him as someone who had been waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The next morning, Claire returned to the forest path where she had met Adrian. She wanted answers, but she also wanted to understand why her grandmother had trusted this place enough to leave it behind. When Adrian appeared, he greeted her calmly, as if he already knew she would return. Claire asked him directly about the cabin, the journal, and the symbols hidden throughout the property. For a moment, Adrian remained silent, looking toward the mountain peaks in the distance. "Your family was connected to this land long before you were born," he finally explained. "The cabin was never just a home. It was a place where an important promise was protected." Claire listened carefully, trying to understand how a simple inheritance had become connected to such a mysterious history. Adrian explained that the mountain held stories passed down through generations, stories about the balance between humans and the ancient Lycan world. He told her that her grandmother had understood the importance of keeping those stories safe. Claire wondered why she had never been told any of this. Adrian answered gently, "Because your grandmother wanted you to choose your own path before knowing what was waiting for you." His words stayed with Claire. She had spent years believing her family simply avoided talking about the past. Now she realized they had been protecting her from a truth she was not ready to carry. As they walked through the forest, Adrian showed her places connected to the cabin's history. He pointed out old markings hidden among the trees and explained that they represented a bond between those who protected the mountain and those who watched over the Lycan realm. Claire noticed that Adrian spoke about the mountain with a deep sense of responsibility. He was not just someone who lived there. He was someone who belonged there. Before she could ask more questions, Adrian stopped near the ancient stone marker. "There is something you need to understand," he said. "Your grandmother did not leave you this cabin because she wanted you to own a piece of land. She left it to you because she believed you were the person who could continue what she started." Claire looked at the symbols carved into the stone and felt a connection she could not explain. For the first time, she wondered if her inheritance was never about the cabin itself. Maybe it was about discovering a part of herself that had been hidden for generations. As the evening light faded across the mountain, Adrian watched Claire carefully. He knew the truth could no longer remain hidden forever. The woman standing before him was not simply the owner of an old cabin. She was the person connected to a promise that had been waiting for her arrival. The morning light covered the mountain valley as Claire Morgan sat inside the old cabin, surrounded by pieces of a history she had never known existed. The journal remained open on the wooden table, its faded pages revealing more questions with every answer she discovered. She had spent years believing her family was ordinary, yet the truth waiting inside this cabin felt much larger than anything she had imagined. After meeting Adrian Blackwood, Claire could no longer ignore the connection between her family and the mysterious world hidden beyond the mountain. She wanted to understand why her grandmother had trusted her with this responsibility. She wanted to know why Adrian had been waiting for someone like her to return. That afternoon, Adrian came to the cabin carrying an old wooden box that appeared to have been carefully preserved for many years. He placed it on the table and looked at Claire with a quiet seriousness. "Your grandmother wanted you to see this when you were ready," he said. Inside the box were several handwritten letters, a small collection of family records, and a symbol that matched the markings throughout the cabin. Claire carefully opened the first letter. The handwriting belonged to her grandmother's mother, the same person who had written the journal. The message explained that the cabin had always been a place of trust between two worlds. It was a place where humans and Lycans once shared understanding instead of fear. Claire read every word carefully, realizing that her family history was connected to something far older than she had ever imagined. The letters spoke about a guardian who had protected the mountain for generations. They described someone with great responsibility, someone who carried the duty of preserving peace. Claire looked at Adrian, already sensing that he was connected to those stories in a way he had not fully explained. "Who are you really?" she asked. Adrian looked toward the window, where the mountain peak stood beneath the afternoon sky. "My name is Adrian Blackwood," he said. "But my role in this place is older than the name people know." Claire waited quietly as he continued. He explained that the mountain had been under his protection for many years, and that the cabin represented a promise between his family and hers. Her grandmother had been one of the few people who knew the truth and understood the importance of keeping it safe. Claire felt overwhelmed, but she did not feel afraid. Instead, she felt a strange sense of belonging. Everything that once seemed like a forgotten family mystery was becoming part of a much larger story. Adrian told her that many people believed history disappeared when no one remembered it. But he believed history waited for the right person to uncover it. Claire looked around the cabin again. The old furniture, the hidden symbols, and the journal no longer felt like forgotten objects. They felt like pieces of a message that had finally reached her. Before leaving, Adrian paused at the doorway. "There is still much you do not know," he said. "The truth about this mountain is connected to you more than you realize." After he disappeared into the forest, Claire returned to the table and opened the journal once more. This time she noticed a page hidden between two sections. On it was a drawing of the cabin, the mountain, and a symbol she had never seen before. Beneath the image were only a few words. "When the heir returns, the hidden king will awaken." Claire stared at the message, feeling the weight of a destiny she had only begun to understand. She finally realized that her grandmother had not left her a forgotten cabin. She had left her the beginning of a story that was waiting to be revealed. The message hidden inside the journal stayed on Claire Morgan's mind long after the evening settled over the mountain. The words about the hidden king felt impossible, yet every discovery had shown her that this place held secrets far beyond what she once believed. The old cabin was no longer just an inheritance. It was a connection to a history that had been waiting quietly for someone to return. The next morning, Claire woke early and began searching through every corner of the cabin. She wanted to understand why her grandmother had trusted her with this responsibility, and why Adrian Blackwood seemed to know so much about her family's past. While organizing the old records inside the wooden box, she discovered another collection of letters hidden beneath a layer of fabric. These letters were different from the others. They were written by several generations of her family, each one describing the importance of protecting the mountain and the promise connected to it. Claire noticed that every letter mentioned the same name, Adrian Blackwood, but they never described him as a stranger. They spoke about him with respect, As someone who had carried a responsibility for a very long time, Claire wondered how someone could remain connected to her family across so many years. When Adrian returned to the cabin that afternoon, she showed him the letters. For the first time, she saw a change in his calm expression. It was not surprise. It was the quiet emotion of someone remembering the past. "Your grandmother wanted you to find these when you were ready," Adrian said. Claire looked at him carefully. "Why did she trust you?" Adrian remained silent for a moment before answering. "Because she understood that some promises are bigger than one person's lifetime." He explained that the mountain had always been a place where different worlds could exist together. The cabin was built as a symbol of trust, and Claire's family had protected its meaning for generations. But over time, fewer people remembered the truth. Stories became legends, and legends became forgotten memories. Claire listened as Adrian explained that the person who inherited the cabin would eventually have to decide what happened next. She was not forced to accept the responsibility. She had to choose it herself. That realization surprised Claire. She had expected to discover a duty waiting for her, but instead she found a choice. Her grandmother had never wanted to control her future. She had simply left a door open for Claire to walk through when she was ready. As they walked around the cabin, Adrian showed her more details hidden within the property. A small room beneath the cabin contained old records, maps, and symbols that connected the mountain to the Lycan realm. Claire carefully studied everything, realizing that her family's history was much deeper than she had ever known. She looked at Adrian and finally asked the question that had been in her heart since their first meeting. "Are you the hidden king my grandmother wrote about?" Adrian looked toward the mountain peaks, where the evening light touched the snow-covered landscape. "I am the one who has protected this place," he answered. "But a title does not define who someone is." His response made Claire understand something important. The truth was not only about discovering who Adrian was. It was also about discovering why she had been brought back to this mountain. As the stars appeared above the cabin, Claire stood at the doorway and looked across the land that once felt unfamiliar. Now it felt like a place connected to her past and her future. She had arrived expecting an old cabin. She had found a forgotten promise, a hidden history, and a connection that could change everything she thought she knew. The truth about Adrian Blackwood remained in Claire Morgan's thoughts as the days passed inside the mountain cabin. She had discovered that he was not simply a mysterious guardian of the forest. He was connected to a history that stretched back generations, a history her family had protected with patience and care. Yet the more Claire learned, the more she realized there were still many pieces of the story waiting to be revealed. Adrian invited Claire deeper into the mountain valley, where ancient paths connected the cabin to places that few people had ever seen. The journey was peaceful, surrounded by tall trees, clear streams, and the quiet beauty of the wilderness. As they walked, Adrian explained that the Lycan realm had existed alongside the human world for centuries, but most people never knew it was there. The balance between both worlds depended on trust, understanding, and the promises made by those who came before them. Claire listened carefully, remembering the words from her grandmother's journal. She finally understood why her family had protected the cabin for so long. It was not about keeping a secret for the sake of mystery. It was about preserving a connection that mattered. When they reached a hidden area beyond the forest, Claire saw an old stone hall built into the mountain. It was not grand or intimidating. Instead, it felt peaceful, like a place created to preserve memories. Inside were records, paintings, and symbols that told the story of those who had protected the mountain throughout history. Claire noticed a familiar symbol displayed at the center of the room. It was the same symbol that appeared inside the cabin. "This was created by your ancestors," Adrian explained. "They believed that the future would depend on someone who understood both worlds." Claire looked at the symbol quietly. She had spent most of her life believing she was simply someone who had inherited an old family property. Now she was beginning to understand that her connection to the cabin was much deeper. Adrian showed her an old record that mentioned her grandmother. It described her as someone who valued kindness above status and wisdom above tradition. Claire smiled when she read those words because they sounded exactly like the woman who raised her. "She always believed people were more than what others expected them to be," Claire said softly. Adrian nodded. "That was why she trusted you." For the first time, Claire understood that her grandmother had never hidden the truth because she doubted her. She had waited because she wanted Claire to discover it in her own time. As the afternoon light moved across the mountain, Adrian shared more about his own journey. He explained that carrying the title of Lycan King was not only about power or responsibility, it was about protecting harmony and making choices that affected many lives. Claire noticed that behind his calm presence was someone who had carried that responsibility for a very long time. She realized Adrian was not defined by his title any more than she was defined by the cabin she inherited. They were both people shaped by choices, promises, and the values they carried. When they returned to the cabin, Claire opened the journal once more. A new page had appeared beneath the old entries, revealing a message her grandmother had written specifically for her. The greatest inheritance is not what we receive. It is what we choose to protect. Claire looked out toward the mountain, knowing her journey was only beginning. She had come searching for answers about an old cabin. Instead, she had discovered a hidden world, a forgotten promise, and a truth that connected her destiny with the mysterious Lycan King. The days that followed changed the way Claire Morgan looked at the mountain, the cabin, and even herself. What once felt like a forgotten place from her family's past now felt like a living connection between generations. Every morning, she woke up surrounded by reminders that she was part of a story much older than she had imagined. Yet Claire also understood that discovering the truth was only the beginning. She still had to decide what role she wanted to play in protecting it. Adrian Blackwood continued teaching her about the history connected to the mountain. He showed her the records left behind by those who had protected the balance between humans and the Lycan realm. Each story revealed the same message. Power was never meant to separate people. It was meant to be guided by responsibility and understanding. Claire found herself thinking about her grandmother more often. She realized that the woman who raised her had spent her entire life preparing her for this moment without ever forcing her toward it. Her grandmother had always encouraged her to be kind, patient, and thoughtful. Those lessons now felt like the most important inheritance she had received. One evening, Claire and Adrian sat outside the cabin, watching the sunset spread across the mountain sky. The quiet moment gave Claire the courage to ask about the future. "What happens now?" she asked. Adrian looked toward the forest, where countless generations had walked before them. "Now the choice belongs to you," he answered. "The mountain does not choose someone because of a title or a family name. It recognizes someone who understands what it means to care for others." Claire thought about those words carefully. For years, she had searched for a place where she belonged. She had believed belonging came from being accepted by others. But now she understood that it came from accepting herself first. Her connection to the cabin was not important because of what it represented to the world. It was important because of what it revealed about her own values. As Claire continued exploring the property, she discovered more details about the relationship between her family and Adrian's ancestors. She found letters describing moments when people from both worlds worked together to protect peace. The stories were not about kings or legends. They were about ordinary choices made by people who believed kindness could change the future. Claire began organizing the old records, hoping to preserve them for future generations. Adrian watched as she carefully handled every document and every memory. He saw something in her that reminded him of the people who had protected the mountain before her. She did not seek recognition. She simply wanted to do what was right. "You understand this place better than many who have known it for years," Adrian told her. Claire smiled softly. "Maybe because I am still learning what it means." Their conversation reminded Adrian of something he had almost forgotten. The future was not protected by those who claimed to have all the answers. It was protected by those willing to keep learning. As the seasons slowly changed around the mountain, Claire accepted that her life would never return to what it was before. She was no longer simply the woman who inherited an old cabin. She was the person who had uncovered a forgotten connection and chosen to honor it. And somewhere beyond the forest, the hidden world that had remained silent for generations was beginning to recognize that a new chapter had finally begun. The first snowfall of the season covered the mountain in a quiet layer of white, transforming the old cabin into a place that felt even more connected to the hidden history surrounding it. Claire Morgan stood near the window, watching the peaceful landscape while thinking about everything that had changed since the day she first arrived. She came expecting a forgotten family property. Instead, she discovered a world filled with stories, promises, and a connection that reached far beyond her imagination. Over the following weeks, Claire continued working with Adrian Blackwood to organize the records preserved inside the cabin. Each document revealed more about the relationship between her family and the Lycan realm. She learned that the people before her were not remembered because of their positions or influence. They were remembered because they chose compassion when it would have been easier to turn away. Claire realized that this was the true meaning behind her grandmother's message. The greatest responsibility was not protecting a secret. It was protecting the values behind that secret. Adrian watched as Claire slowly transformed the cabin from a forgotten place into a place where memories could be preserved for the future. She created a small archive inside the old rooms, carefully arranging the journals, letters, and records that told the story of two worlds learning to understand each other. "You are rebuilding what was almost forgotten," Adrian said one afternoon. Claire looked around the room filled with generations of memories. "I am only continuing what others started before me." Adrian smiled because he understood the meaning behind her words. Claire did not see herself as someone special because of destiny. She saw herself as someone responsible for making the right choices. That was exactly why the mountain had led her back. As time passed, more people from the Lycan community began visiting the cabin. They did not come because Claire demanded respect or because of a title connected to her family. They came because they saw the sincerity behind her actions. Claire welcomed every visitor with the same kindness she had always carried. She wanted the cabin to become a place where stories could be shared, and where old misunderstandings could slowly disappear. Adrian noticed the change spreading beyond the mountain. The connection between the human world and the Lycan realm was becoming stronger because of trust rather than obligation. He had spent many years believing that protecting the future meant carrying every responsibility alone. But Claire showed him that the future was not something one person protected by themselves. It was something created together. One evening, Adrian and Claire walked along the familiar path behind the cabin. The same trail that once felt mysterious now felt like a reminder of everything they had discovered. "Do you ever miss the life you had before?" Adrian asked. Claire thought for a moment before answering. "I miss the person I was before I knew the truth, but I do not want to go back. I finally understand where I belong." Her words stayed with Adrian. For so long, he had carried the identity of the Lycan King without allowing himself to imagine another future. Now he saw that even someone with great responsibility could still find a place that felt like home. As the moon rose above the mountain, the old cabin stood quietly among the trees. It was no longer a forgotten inheritance. It had become a symbol of connection, hope, and a promise finally being honored. And deep within the hidden world beyond the forest, people began to understand that the return of the heir had changed more than the cabin. It had changed the future itself. Years had passed since Claire Morgan first arrived at the mountain cabin, but the place still carried the same quiet feeling of mystery that welcomed her on the first day. The difference was that the cabin was no longer a forgotten piece of her family's past. It had become a place where memories were protected, stories were shared, and two worlds learned to understand each other. Claire often walked through the rooms where she once searched for answers, remembering how uncertain she had felt when she first discovered the old journal. At that time, she believed she was only looking for the truth about her inheritance. She never imagined she would discover a connection that would change the way she viewed her family, her future, and herself. The old records she preserved inside the cabin became a bridge between generations. People from both the human world and the Lycan realm came to learn about the promises that had been protected for so long. They discovered that the history of the mountain was not built on power or status. It was built on trust, patience, and the courage to understand those who were different. Claire was proud of what the cabin had become, but she never forgot the simple lessons her grandmother had taught her. She still believed that kindness mattered more than recognition, and that a person's actions revealed their true character. Adrian Blackwood continued his role as the Lycan King, but his life had changed in ways he never expected. Before Claire returned to the mountain, he believed his duty meant carrying every responsibility alone. He believed that protecting the future required him to stand apart from others. Claire showed him another way. She reminded him that even the strongest person could need connection, understanding, and someone who truly saw them beyond their title. One evening they stood outside the cabin watching the stars above the mountain. The same place that once held unanswered questions now felt peaceful and complete. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing, Adrian said. Claire smiled as she looked toward the cabin behind them. She knew I would find my way here when I was ready. Adrian looked at the lights inside the cabin, remembering the generations who had protected its secret. This place waited a long time for the right person. Claire understood then that the cabin was never just a building. It was a reminder that the choices people make can create a future they may never see themselves. The promise protected by her family was not about keeping the past hidden forever. It was about giving the future a chance to become better. As the years continued, stories about the mountain spread beyond the forests. People remembered the woman who inherited an old cabin and discovered a hidden connection to the Lycan King. But the most important part of the story was never the mystery or the secret. It was the lesson behind it. Claire learned that sometimes the things we inherit are not possessions. They are responsibilities, memories, and opportunities to make a difference. Adrian learned that even a king could find a place where he did not need to stand alone. Together, they protected the promise that had connected their families for generations. And the old mountain cabin remained beneath the endless sky, no longer forgotten, but forever remembered as the place where destiny finally found its way home.